Hello everyone, my name is Precious Nusi and I'm a second-year college student majoring in biomedical sciences with the Sophie Davis BSMD program. So this past summer I did research with my school and Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center on understanding university students' knowledge of the human papillomavirus, also known as HPV, and seeking interventions to increase vaccination rates. This was in the form of a literature review. I thought that I'd come on here and share my findings with you all and to raise awareness on HPV and encourage others to get vaccinated if they haven't already. So without further ado, please enjoy. First, we'll start off with a brief discussion on what HPV is. So the human papillomavirus is a sexually transmitted infection, the most common nationally, roughly affecting 13 million Americans every single year. There are over 100 different strains of the virus, and what's interesting is that a lot of the time people will contract HPV and they will be asymptomatic and the body will resolve the virus on its own. But there are 12 high-risk strains that are linked to genital warts and numerous cancers like cervical cancer, penile cancer, anal cancer, head and neck, and much more. So thankfully, there is a vaccine available and routinely recommended for children ages 11 to 12, but those up to age 26 can get it, and now 45 years old as of 2018. Now, this data is from the Office of Disease Prevention and Health Promotion, which basically displays the Healthy People 2030 goal of having 80% of teens vaccinated by the year 2030. But by 2021, as you can see here, only 58.5% were. Now, this really underscores the need for catch-up vaccinations among people ages 18 to 26, because this is the age group where people start to normally increasingly engage in sexual activity. So the need for vaccination is crucial. And that's actually the entire premise for why the 18 to 26-year-old range is the target population for this research. So I have 3 objectives, right? The first one being to examine exactly how much college students know about HPV and looking at the relationship between this and self-reported vaccination status. Then I wanted to assess the on-campus interventions from the past that may or may not have helped the vaccination rates. And finally, to provide recommendations on how to increase these vaccination rates among New York City college students. So for my methods, the first thing I did was contact a medical librarian for guidance on how to properly conduct a literature review. Then I used the online databases of PubMed, CINAHL, and our school's online library. For my inclusion criteria, the main thing I was focused on was having peer-reviewed articles that were published in or after 2014. Then the next step of my methods is I summarize each of the articles that I found and examine common findings. And finally, I contacted 6 schools in the New York City public university system for for prevalence on the amount of students that were vaccinated at their respective campuses. Now, my results were split into 2 sections, but to start off, I had 14 articles for final examination. 6 had to do with knowledge, 7 had to do with the interventions, and 1 was just trends and predictors. And what's interesting is that females actually had a higher rate of participation across all knowledge and intervention articles and were more likely to have spoken about HPV in the past with the healthcare provider. So now, how did researchers measure knowledge? Well, students received an email about the research study, and those who were interested filled out a survey with yes or no or true or false statements regarding HPV transmission, symptoms, and associated cancers. So for example, a sample item on these surveys would be something like, I can transmit HPV even if I don't have any symptoms. That would be true. Or condoms are not effective in preventing HPV. That is false. Now, this table displays each of the universities from the knowledge articles, and because they are abbreviated, I will specify. They are California State University, Los Angeles, University of Maryland, California State University, San Marcos, University of Mississippi, University of South Carolina, and University at Alabama. Now, the table also shows the sample sizes for the articles, the number of total survey items, and finally, the most important part, the mean score percentages, and this is on the bottom column. Now, you'll notice that the scores range from 48% on the low side to just 73% on the high side. Now, if you think about it, 73% is the equivalent to a C in most universities. What's also interesting is that students who were saying that they did receive the HPV vaccine did have higher levels of knowledge in comparison to students who were saying that they hadn't received the vaccine. And in 2 studies, participants were saying that their perceptibility of contracting the virus themselves was low, when in actuality, if you're sexually active, you can get HPV. So for my intervention articles, there were 4 main types of strategies that I found, these being campus-based marketing, provider recommendations, electronic messaging, and educational campaigns. For campus-based marketing, researchers essentially put up flyers, banners, posters all around the school to promote vaccination at their student health centers. For provider recommendations, the clinicians at the student health centers were instructed to recommend the vaccine to students who were coming in and they weren't vaccinated yet. Then for electronic messaging, those who were coming in to initiate their series, they just signed up for an email or text message system to remind them to come in and get their next dose. And finally, for the educational campaigns, this was basically a baseline and post-education survey once students received formal teaching on HPV by the researchers or other people part of the research study. Now, this table shows the different universities for the intervention articles, the intervention types, and the major findings in them. So all across the board, campus-based marketing and provider recommendations were the most efficient at increasing the vaccination rates on campus. If you look at Florida State University, for example, you'll see that there was a 77% increase in doses given across just 2 semesters. Similarly, in Johns Hopkins University, there was a 76% dose increase from the control year to the intervention year. Now, with the educational campaigns and electronic messaging, these ultimately did not do much in increasing vaccination rates, but for the educational campaign, they were good at boosting the levels of knowledge and the intent to get vaccinated, but uptake really wasn't there. To bring it back, again, I did reach out to 6 schools in New York City's public university system for prevalence on who was vaccinated at their respective campuses. Only 3 got back to me, those being Brooklyn College, Queens College, and Lehman College, but unfortunately, none were able to provide me with numbers, and the universal reason for this is because HPV isn't required for enrollment at schools, they simply don't keep track of that data. To conclude, while college students were aware of HPV, their accurate knowledge was suboptimal. Again, referring back to the table, you can see that the average score percentages only range from about 48% to 73% of correct answers only. Now, increasing education can improve the knowledge levels, but based on this review, they weren't good indicators of uptake, or educational campaigns in particular weren't good indicators of uptake. Now, ultimately, campus-based marketing and provider recommendations did prove to be the most effective at increasing the vaccination rates. But for next steps, I do think it would be interesting to look at what the data would look like if different subgroups were examined. So, for example, race or social class. And that is all. Thank you so much for watching. And my message to you would be to, of course, get vaccinated against HPV if you haven't already. Be curious about your health and ask your primary care physician questions, because ultimately they are there to support you on your journey to wellness. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.